Hey, welcome. So today I want to do just a quick video running through the wiring of a Necessary Evil kit. This is the NE3.0. It's got carbon fiber top and bottom plates, some upgraded drive, and we're going to be wiring in Repeat Robotics budget dual ESC. We're going to be using a FlySky i6 and this FS IA6 receiver. We're going to be using the battery that comes with this kit, which is a 300 milliamp hour 3S LiPo. And that is it. So I'll start by removing the armor off the kit. So the first thing I like to do right away is these batteries have a little bit of insulation on them, or not insulation, it's like a heat shrink. And I like to take a razor blade and just put a notch in that heat shrink. And then I'll peel it back. And I'm just going around under the wires at the top of the battery. And the reason I do this is the wires can bend a little farther. Looking at this, we've got our drive motor wires over here. We've got our two wires that need to go to the receiver, and then we've got our main power leads. What we can do is just cut the wire here and desolder at the connector. And that's the method I'm going to show. We're going to try to reuse as much of the wiring here as we can, but I do have a little bit of 24 gauge wire to help fill in some of the gaps. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tin the power switch, and this just gets it ready for soldering later. So what I'm doing is I'm tinning the iron, I'm holding the iron on the switch, and then I'm adding a little bit of solder. I just want to get a little bubble to stick. I don't want to overheat this because the switches are 3D printed and they can melt if you really just hold the soldering iron on there. So there we go, I got a nice bubble here. This bubble isn't as great, so I'm just going to add a little more solder. There we go, really get a nice spread with that bead of solder. We need power. So looking at this, we've got some insulation in the way. Or I keep calling it insulation, heat shrink in the way of this connector. So I like to do the positive wire for my power switch, but you could do the negative wire if you want. It's the same results, it's the same process. Now I'm going to desolder this. So to desolder it, I will grab my third hand, put the connector in like so. I will tin the soldering iron. No, it's not sticking for some reason. Probably need to clean the tip. So now I've got a bubble of solder on the iron. I'm just going to hold it there and pull it away. And this can run to our power switch. And everything is tinned except the iron. So I'll just tin the iron, hold the wire over the bubble of solder, and then just press from the top down, trying to contact both the switch and the wire at once. And I'm holding the wire in place as the solder dries. So that's good to go. Now we need a power wire running from this side of the switch back up to this positive. Now, I have a little bit of heat shrink. set aside for this task. I'll cut a little bit like that. And then here's my wire. The battery is going to go in, at least this is how I put the battery in. I put it in this way. The balance lead kind of gets tucked around the switch. Looking at this negative terminal, this has a comfortable spot about there in the center of the robot. So I'm going to take the battery out, and I'm going to run from there. I'm going to loop the wire back so I've got a little bit of slack. I'm going to go, see that loop? I'm going to go about to where I found a comfortable spot for the connector. I'm going to strip both ends. Tin my iron. I like to put the iron under the wire once it's tinned and then feed the solder in from the top. That seems to get the best distribution and heat transfer. Sometimes you'll get a little ball of solder that sticks to the wire. Sometimes you can just flick it off, and that gets your wires looking a little nicer. We've seen this part before, soldering to the switch. So this is where the third hand is going to be critical. And before I solder it, I want to make sure we put that heat shrink on. Otherwise, you'll just have to desolder it, do the thing again. All right, I've actually switched to holding the wire this time, just to try and get things in shot. Because what I'm trying to do is, I like to put the soldering iron in this bubble of solder first and get that molten. And then once it's molten, I keep the iron in there and I make sure I'm touching that wire as well. And I get the wire in the middle of that bubble of solder and I hold it there while it dries. I can take my heat shrink and just push that up as far as it'll go. You can use a lighter for this step. I use the side of the soldering iron and I just make sweeping passes as I rotate the wire to hit all sides. If we were to plug in a battery and turn this switch on, we would power up this dual ESC. But it's not going to do anything because it doesn't have motors that are connected to it, and it doesn't have signal to control those motors. I'm going to leave a little bit of slack and just do 2 at a time. I'm adding more slack into the wires than I normally would. And that's just to be able to crank this out without having a great plan. When you leave some extra wire length, you can get away with cramming things in a less planned way. And it's always good to have some slack in your wires, even for super well planned builds, because when your robot gets hit and the motors move a little bit or the frame bends even just for half a second, your wires are going to get pulled. And on one of my first robots, I learned that lesson very quickly, that motor wires will just snap off if you have them basically under tension, like I did. These motors need to be tinned. Technically, you would have better access to the motors if you take them out, but I'm gonna do it inside the robot. So I'm just making a nice little bubble of solder on the iron. I'm holding that onto the side of the tab, and then I'm adding some solder to get everything to stick. All right, there we go. So that's all tinned. Now these motors have, and this is going to be tough to see. So you see that little plus. So this tab, I'm going to put the red wires to. And this is one of those steps that doesn't really matter with being able to program the controller. But for troubleshooting and knowing what wires correspond with what, that's what I like to do, is I put the red wires to positive, even on the motors. On motor wires especially, I give everything a little bit of a tug. Real light. I'm just making sure it's not going to snap off. If I did a cold joint, that might be what happens. Snap a picture or do something so you can remember this. Maybe even reference this video. I don't know. You've got some important things on here. S is for sensor. Positives always in the center. Negative always on the outside of these receivers. This one starts from the bottom up. Channel 1, 2, 3, 4, you can count. What is interesting is there's these 6 channels, and then there's a battery. This is basically just a hookup for power and isn't actually a channel that you can run. So remember that, because now I'm going to take this plastic and peel it off. And this is going to give us the extra little bit of space that we need to put this thing on its side. Something worth noting, carbon fiber conducts electricity, so all these exposed pins are not great. So what I would do is hook up my channels, and that's going to cover these bottom pins, but for like the back of this and the top pins, you could get a large piece of heat shrink and wrap it over. The other thing is you can just be lazy and grab, like, here's a random piece of gaff tape, and just do little sections of tape. That's a method as well. That's decent. I'm not too worried about this little bit at the back. It's got this bit of foam, so that'll probably be fine. This antenna we don't want to cut. We want to keep all of this antenna, so that'll just take a bit of work to be coiled up somewhere. That can be hot glued down as well. Really, all these electronics, even if you don't just coat everything in hot glue and use that as your insulation, you can just put a bit of hot glue down to keep everything in place. It's nice to not have your electronics rattling around. All right, and with this, this is a sensor wire. This white wire is a sensor wire. Red and black is your power. So this is power and ground for the signal, but this is also power and ground for the receiver, so that actually powers up. So again, outside pins, ground, inner or inside pins, always positive. I guess inside, I should say middle pins are positive, and then inside pins are sensor. Counting from the bottom up, so channel 1, channel 2. Channel 1 and channel 2 correspond with this joystick. This is what I'm going to set up for movement. That's a good spot. Now, these wires are trying to leave, so we can just lock that in with the front armor. I should have glued these down. I don't want to screw around with hot glue for the sake of this video. Alright, so I've just confirmed that this controller is bound to the receiver from the factory, but now I'm just going to go ahead and power it up for the first time. So I've plugged in this battery. I've turned the controller on with all my switches and joysticks centered. I guess my switches are up, my joysticks are centered. Nothing's in a position it shouldn't be. And then we'll tighten this power switch. Nice and snug. And we can test the channels. All right, so left and right is controlling that motor. If I hold this one, forward and back is controlling that motor. So that's a good starting point. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set up mixing. So I'm going to turn the robot off. And now we're just going to go into the controller settings. So on these fly skies, if you press and hold OK, you've got to press it once to wake up the screen. We can use this up and down to navigate menus. You've got your cancel button here. If you press that quickly, that'll get you out of a menu. If you're in a menu, like we're gonna go down to mix, but let's say you were in reverse, click OK to select it, and you change, OK cycles through these, up and down changes the direction. If I do this, and then I just press cancel, and I go back into the menu, come on, nothing has saved. So what you need to do is when you make your settings changes, you need to press and hold cancel, and then that'll get you out of the menu. And now everything is saved. So I'm gonna undo that. Yep, that's good to go. Now I'm gonna go down to mix. Here's how this is gonna work. So when you push the stick forwards, you want both channel 1 and 2 to fire at the same time, and you want both motors to drive the robot forwards when you do this. And you want both motors to drive the robot backwards when you do this. Left and right is a little different. You want one motor to go forwards, and you want the other motor to go backwards. Channel 1 is, I believe, just up and down, and channel 2 is left and right. So what we need to do is set up channel 1 as a master of channel 2. So when this master channel goes forward and it gives the motor a positive input, it's also going to give channel 2 and that motor a positive input. They're both going to go forwards. But then we want to set it up so that channel 2 is a master of channel 1, so that when we go left, I think this corresponds with negative on the fly sky. So if we go left, negative, that's also going to take motor 1, and this is where it gets tricky. Instead of sending it a negative value, it sends motor 1 a positive value. We want it to run the opposite direction. That's the gist of it. So looking at this menu, which is a pain to navigate, okay, cycles through from top to bottom. Up and down is what changes these individual rows. Excuse me. I'm recording this video way past my bedtime. Bear with me. So what we're gonna do is we'll turn the mixes on afterwards. Just a good habit, safety thing. So master, slave, channel 1, channel 2, that looks good. This first one, we're gonna take the positive mix, the negative mix, and go all the way up to 100%. I've played with this, and it affects something, and I can't remember what. I saw a tutorial that did this, and I've just always copied it since. So this is the easy one. They both go to 100%. And then your offset, just leave that at 0. All right, now we can turn that on. Now go to mix number 2, and we're gonna change the master to channel 2 and the slave to channel 1. And this is where we've got to wait, because we're gonna go to negative 100% on both these channels. All right, that looks good. Now we're gonna turn this on, and here's the most important step of the whole thing. Hold cancel, because you just did all that work and you don't want to lose your mix. All right, now, if we go to display, this shows us what's going on with our channels. So if we go up, those are going in the opposite direction. Actually, I misspoke a little bit. Because the motor direction needs to be switched on the opposite side of the robot, your up and down is actually giving opposite inputs, and your left and right is giving matching inputs. But those details don't matter. So now we're going to turn this on and we're going to test it, and it's probably not going to work. So we'll probably have to fix things in our reverse section of the menu. So controller's on, robot can be turned on. And I'm gonna prop this up. Okay. So if we go up with the stick, they're spinning the same way, but the wrong direction. If we go right with the stick, they're spinning opposite directions, which is good, but when we push the stick right, it's taking a left turn. So what we can do to fix this is just reverse channels 1 and 2. Whoops. Now if we exit this, that's good. That's good. This motor is binding up a little bit because it needs the pressure from the top plate. But if I just hold it, that's all working right. So now, what we can do is shut the robot off and button this thing up, and then take it for a little test. Here's that tricky battery placement. Okay, everything is tightened up. Controller on. Robot on. And now it drives. Now I'm just going to shut everything down and clean up. So hopefully that helps get you going with your necessary evil kits. You can always reach out to me at Betz Botz if you have any questions about how to get this thing going, how to repair it, etc. All right. Thanks for watching.